Okay, so we're here today to talk about the online forum, and we're going to start. I'm hoping I'm going to keep it to 15 minutes. And let me just say that I just finished creating one of the most, this tip sheet took me a long time to make, so I hope you appreciate it. But there it is. It's the forum grading, the new forum grading tip sheet, and it'll be in the faculty Moodle resource as well. And we'll also put it on the CTL resource page where we're doing all the tech tune-ups under resources. But this is what I'll be talking about. So I'm going to go a little fast, but it's not going to be a how-to talk. It's going to be more of a demo, how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so this is the, you're seeing my Moodle course, I hope. Somebody shake their head, yes, thank you. Okay, so here's a forum, and I'm using here a Moodle, a forum rubric. And I just have to say, if you've been grading forums, this is a vast, vast improvement. And I know it's slightly complicated, but it's not really once you're in there and you're using it. So here my students have all posted. I actually have groups because I have a lot of students in this course. And when I'm ready to grade, you can see right here, there's this grade users. And I've got all of my human people who have not posted. There we go. Okay, so let's get Christopher Cow here.
Can I pause you for 1 second? Just a reminder to everyone, if the videos, our images of our videos are on the right and covering up some of the things that Bonnie's clicking on, you can grab the video window and drag it to the top, and it will then cover the top if that's better, or the left, wherever you want to put it.
Thank you, Nathan. You're right. Everything's going to be on the right of the screen here. So if you have pictures, our pictures there, please move them out of the way. So what happens here is I've got all of Christopher's posts in this forum on the left, which is a great thing. Right away, they've isolated his posts, but also they've given me these tags so that I can see that in context. So he has responded to Chastity here. And so if I click that, I can see here's his response, there's Chastity who he's responding to. So you really get all of the context as well as the isolated comments to look at. Over here on the right is where I'm going to grade him. And so here are the criteria in my rubric. And I'm going to show you, let's back up for a minute. So I had to build this rubric, but here it is. And here's my criteria: critical thinking, clarity, contribution to learning, and timeliness. And then here's all my increments. Well, when I go to grade him, actually, oh, now I'm going to have to get back there. Should have 2 tabs open. So here's the criteria. And to open up and see all of the increments, I click on this little arrow to the right. And it's probably very small on your screen, but take my word for it, it's an arrow. And then it'll be automatically not set. And then here's all of my increments. And you can see I can give a 5 point, 3.5, 0.2, or 0. And here's the language that goes with that. So I would just click the radio button, and I would go through and do all of the criteria. Okay, this one's already, I've already kind of graded this, so I can go really quickly. So now they're all set. And I'm going to come up here now to the top. Oh, there's a place for additional comments for each criterion. Okay, so if I wanted to say something more, why they didn't get full credit, or especially, a comment that was especially good. And when I'm all done, I come up here to this, click the save button up here at the very top. And automatically this is going to go into the gradebook. Moodle's going to add it all up, and it's going to put it in the gradebook. And then I can proceed to the next student, just clicking that arrow to move me. And now I've got Horace's comments over here. Again, I can see the context if I want to, and I can go through and I can grade whatever I want. I can put any additional comments there and just keep going. Now, the thing is, this first criterion, the descriptions are pretty long. So I really need to close that back up sometimes to be able to see the other criteria and move through it. So that's the one thing that's a little bit difficult. Once you get the hang of that, after I grade, I might need to close that back up again so I can see the next one. We're going to probably change this default. Right now, it's set to no, that I won't notify the student that there's been graded. I think we're going to change the default to yes for now. I mean, you're not going to probably be grading over the summer, but you know, probably come fall, that'll be yes automatically. So that the student, they won't get their grade, but they'll get notification of it. So that's the rubric. And we can also use a grading guide. Now, a grading guide is what I call a rubric light. And so let's just go ahead and grade. Oh, first I wanted to show it to you. Okay, let's go to advanced. Oops, I went all the way out. So what a grading guide does is it gives you the criterion, it gives you the description of excellent work, and it gives you a maximum score. So this gives you more flexibility. So in the rubric, you'll notice I could give a 5, I could give a 3.5, but I couldn't give a 4. I didn't have an increment for a 4. So if I want more flexibility, if I want to be able to say, for this criterion, I want to give anywhere from 0 to 5 points, then the grading guide is what I want. So same thing, I mean, these are the same max points, but a little bit more flexibility. What I don't get are the other language about those other increments, that description, which is really nice to have that feedback to be able to give. But what I do have is frequently used comments. So I can load those other comments in as frequently used comments, and then I can use them. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to go in and grade. So I think I'm in a different, I'm sorry, I'm in a different form here than I want to be. I guess I was in the right one. Should have gone the other way. Okay, so here for Herman now, again, we get the same thing, all of his comments over here. And then what it looks like here is there's my criterion. Here's where I'm going to put in that number, 0 to 5, and any additional comments. Now, if I don't remember what the description of excellent work is, there's a little I here, and that's going to bring up that description. Then I can put the score in. And if I want to use a frequently used comment, there's a little black box. It actually looks like a little present, which I love. I think it's a box with a little cross. I think it looks like a bow, because I think that frequently used comments are a gift. And so I just mouse over them, and I can put in, just by clicking on it, that frequently used comment, and then I can also edit it if I want to make some changes to it. So the grading guide, the rubric, this is an answer to prayers for forum grading, because as we know, forum grading can take a long time. So this really can streamline it. It gives you everything you need. It gives you the student, postings, and then it gives you your rubric or your grading guide, and does math for you, which for me is a blessing. And as my friends will know, I actually invited 3 friends over the other night. We had some stuff out on the balcony, and I made appetizers for 3. Fortunately, they shared with me. So, and it actually took me a few minutes. I was actually dishing things out, and it took till I had an empty bowl for me to realize that I had only made 3 appetizers. I'm an English teacher, what can I say? All right, so let me stop sharing, and do we have any questions? You can just unmute yourself, and no math questions.
Hi, Bonnie, this is Emily Schilling here. This is probably something you've already gone over, but can you remind me how you get your frequently used comments to get into that drop-down option?
Yeah, you have to build them into it. So I didn't go over building the rubric and the grading guide. That's in the tip sheet that I sent.
Separate, okay.
But yeah, it's in that building aid stage. But okay. I'm glad for your question, because let's say I'm grading and I realize I'm saying the same thing over and over again. I can actually stop the process, and I can go back into here to advanced grading. That'll bring it up. I can edit this form. I can go down and add another frequently used comment. And then, thank you. I'm not sharing my screen. Let me do this again. Thank you, Nathan. I'm so glad I have Nathan in my life. Okay, let's do this again. So I'm in the assignment. I'm going to go over here at my administration block, and this is administering the forum. I'm going to click advanced grading. I'm going to say I'm going to edit the current form, and then I can come down here, and here's my frequently used comments, and I can add one, and then just save. And now from that point on, I have that frequently used comment to use. It doesn't change anything for any grading I've already done. It doesn't affect it. You can go ahead and edit the form and add things, and it won't be a problem. Okay, good question. Thanks for asking that. Any others?
A math question. Sorry, Bonnie. This came up in one of the workshops last week, but just a caution that if you're using small point categories like that on a rubric or a grading guide, and you have a category that's worth 4 points, and you give it a 3, you might think I'm just taking off 1 point, but Moodle's actually going to grade. That's a 75%. That's a C in most people's book, and I don't know if you realize you might be thinking of a 4-point scale where a 3 is a B. But Moodle's going to calculate it as a percentage, which is 75% of it. Just one tiny assignment, it doesn't make much difference. But if you do a bunch of those over a semester and they're adding up into a category that's 20% of your total grade, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, I tend to either rate things, again, because I'm math challenged, as 10s or 100s. That helps me make sure that I'm not. I can figure out a 10, 9, what a 9, 8, 5, 7 all is. But yeah, I have a little more trouble once we get into those other things. But thanks, Michael.
Sure.
You can also, Moodle will do the math for you. So you could have a rubric that only adds up to like 7 points, but make the max points for the assignment 100, and it'll do the math for you. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lori.
Oh, okay. And then can you show us again how the students would view that comment? And I kind of got the impression that some of my students never looked at the comments, which was frustrating because I spent a lot of time on them, and then they just didn't even look at their grade. But does it pop up automatically? I can't remember.
I'm going to send a little video that would you do well to put in your Moodle course. Hang on just a second. I can't talk and type. This is a little video that will show students how to read rubrics and Moodle rubrics and grading guides. They do have to go back into the assignment to see it. They're not going to see it. Whatever. Let me go in as one of my students. Sorry. Okay, so we'll go in as Christopher.
You have to share your screen again.
Oh, thank you. It's one of those days. All right. So let's go in and see his grade here. So he has to click View Grades, and there he's going to see, he's going to have to open things up to see it as well. So I actually am going to have to add to that video to make a little bit more. I didn't realize it's a little bit more complicated than I thought. But they're going to go in, they're going to see that View Grades. I'm in as Christopher right now, and then they're going to be able to see, here's their final grade when it was graded, and then they'll be able to see all their feedback and what they got. So you can't see it, it's a little shaded out, but they'll see the radio button checked for the criterion that I checked for them. Maybe we'll try to make that a little bit darker if we can, to get the Moodle wizards on that one. Okay, we're at like 10:16, so I'd like to move on unless there's more questions.
I wanted to comment on Lori's comment there, that I agree that was something that I was challenged by in the spring, was getting students to really engage with the gradebook in a way that they were taking my feedback into account. And maybe this is a topic for a different discussion, but how do we, is there a way to know whether they're looking at feedback, and then how we kind of coach them to make that part of their practice as a student? So probably a topic for another time, but it is a concern of mine.
Well, I just would say that video, and like I said, I'm going to add to that video, to cover this now too. Share that early, and it makes the point that if they're just looking in the Moodle gradebook, they're not getting all of your feedback. It kind of reiterates that over and over again. If you really want to see your instructor's feedback, then you have to do this. The only other thing I would say is suggestion is, you know, in the beginning, you might want to make a sort of meta assignment where, you know, they have to reply and say something about your feedback to make sure that they are finding it and getting to it. I don't know that we could pull Moodle data easily that you would be able to. I don't know if there's a report that would show you that easily, that if they've checked that. Okay, let's move on if I could, and we're talking about online forums and online discussions. And, you know, I mentioned this yesterday. I was at Jennifer's meeting, and the online forum is really one of the things that got me really excited about learning technology way back when I first started doing this, because I felt it was one of those online tools that you could really start to use for more critical thinking kinds of skills. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through some of these slides, but you know, here's what I learned early on that I appreciated about online discussions. First of all, it really did make students responsible for learning. It really put, you know, them more than even a face-to-face discussion, I felt. It requires 100% participation, and I rarely saw that in the face-to-face classroom, all of my students raising their hands and being involved. But this way, everybody has to participate. In some ways, it does encourage different perspectives. It's not anonymous, but there is something about the online environment that sometimes people who are shy, who not like to raise their hand in a classroom and everybody turns and looks at you, there's none of that online, and so that's really a nice thing. It offers time to reflect. You know, in the classroom, you ask a question, and frequently the very first answer is not necessarily the most thoughtful or complete one. And so, really, you know, students can let the question marinate and their own answers marinate a little bit, which is really nice. That's part of the asynchronous element. And then I found too, as someone who was always saying, you know, after somebody would answer, I would say, where in the text did you see that? It seems to encourage more text-based responses because they have the time to look those things up and add them, type them in, that sort of thing. And despite all of these benefits, what I have discovered over and over again when I've talked to students and to instructors is they don't like online discussions. And there's reasons for that. Here's the reasons that they give. For students often complain that online discussions are busy work. They complain there's too many posts, that the prompts aren't interesting, that they find the other students' answers, things start to get redundant. And biggest for them is that, you know, they don't count towards their final grade. And that's why I'm so glad about this new grading thing, because I think it will make the grading that we do much more visible to students and also streamline it for us so that we do it. We do it well. Because again, you know, I think substantive feedback in a sustainable way, that's my motto here. For instructors, this is what I hear often, that their online discussions are ineffective, that students don't engage, that they find that the posts are sort of mundane, not very thoughtful. Big problem sometimes can be answers are sort of plagiarized. You know, there's a student that goes in after 3 other students have posted and kind of says the same thing in slightly different words. And that they can be very time consuming and grade. And once again, I think this new grading interface will solve some of that. Well, I have some rules for the effectiveness of online discussions. And again, just a little bit of my background. I taught online for many years. And I really leaned heavily on the online discussion because, again, I thought it was a great tool. But these are the rules that I followed in order to have success. It doesn't just happen. Just like in the face-to-face classroom, a really good discussion doesn't just happen. You don't just pull it out of your pocket. You know, it takes planning ahead of time and thinking through what you want to have happen, and then in the moment, responding in a way to make that happen. Well, the very first thing I would say if you want to be successful is that you need to use groups in forums. If you think about it, let's say we have a class of 20 students. So if I'm in that class, I'm number 20, that means there's 19 other students. The sort of usual assignment is everybody needs to post a response and then reply to 2 other students. So everybody's doing 3 posts. Well, that's 57 posts that will appear for me to read. And I am not going to be engaged by that. I'm going to be overwhelmed. At best, I'm disengaged. At worst, I might actually feel like I'm invisible. And that's when the plagiarizing comes in. That's when the mundane posts come in. You know, nobody's going to see this. Everybody's, you know, after the first 8 postings, there's nothing original for me to say. And so therefore, you know, this is what 57 posts will result in. So instead, the sweet spot is really 5 to 7 students in a group. So let's say we have 5 students. That means I've got 4 other students in my group. They're going to post 3 times. That's 12 posts to read. That's a reasonable amount of work to do, and I'm going to probably do it because it is reasonable. I'm not going to read, even if you say you don't have to read all the posts. If there's 57 posts, how many of those am I going to read? So the first rule is groups. The second rule is specify 2 different weekly deadlines. Again, you probably want to have them respond to you and then to reply to another 1 or 2 group members. Well, if you only have 1 deadline, I can reassure you that for most students, when they look at the work, they're going to think I'll do it later. I'm going to wait until the deadline to do my work. And so that means there's not going to be a conversation. That means I'm going to go in and post the first time at the very last minute. And what's going to happen is maybe there's 1 student who's a good student and they've gone in right away and they've posted. They're going to sit the rest of the time waiting to see another post that they can reply to, and they're going to get frustrated. So really important to have 2 deadlines. I used to make mine Thursday night and Saturday night. I gave them a little bit more time for the first one because they need to digest the material before they post. And then they need less time for the replies. Third rule. Require peer-to-peer interaction. I sometimes have instructors who come in, we're setting up forum assignments, and they'll say, you know, just wanted to post and answer these, you know, this prompt. And I'm like, well, how about the other students? And don't you want them to reply, to read the other students? And, well, I don't really care about that. Well, to me then, that's not an online discussion. In fact, you know, the thing that I liked about the online discussion when I first started doing it is that it was a very different thing from the classroom discussion. I used to find that it was very difficult for me to not be the absolute center of that classroom. And so I kind of played discussion ping pong with my students. You know, I would hit the question to them, they would hit the answer back to me, and maybe I would ask a follow-up question. They would answer that follow-up question. But very rarely in the classroom did I see them sort of like somebody would say something and then the student would turn to that other student and have something to say to them. I mean, it happened, but it didn't happen as much as I wanted it to happen. You know, I was the center of that discussion all the time. Well, if you do it right in an online discussion, it's everybody working together to sort of create meaning. And so the students are talking to each other. And that to me was the really exciting thing about the online discussion is being decentered. And in fact, I've had experiences where I rarely insert myself into the discussion because I really want them to be talking to each other. But you know, you'll have a group you see them, the discussion kind of going in a way that's not going to be productive. And so I would try to step in and maybe ask a question. Well, have you thought about this in the text or whatever? And I've gotten voted off the island, which is both frightening and exciting, you know, for it to be that decentered. That, you know, I can't imagine in the classroom if somebody said a group of students were saying things, and I said, well, you know, what about this in the text? Have you thought about that? Does that square with what that text says? And have them say, yeah, we agree. You know, we don't agree with you. So anyway, that's a great thing. You need to require peer-to-peer interaction. I obviously have too much on my slide here. The next thing, really important, articulate your expectations. A rubric, a grading guide will really do that, but make it really clear what you expect. And in the online classroom especially, hold them to those expectations early in the semester so that they understand that, yeah, this is what's going to happen. And, you know, and by that I mean, I was a rigorous grader in the early weeks of online discussions. I gave them the points that I thought they had earned, even if those were kind of low scores. And I always explained where they needed to improve so that they knew that. But if I give all A's when the work is not A quality, I'm still going to get non-A work quality the rest of the semester. So, you know, articulate your expectations and stick to them. And I think I've got another, yes. So this is, I think this is where a good rubric will come into play. And then lastly, you need to provide meaningful prompts and evaluation. And I know I'm dating myself a little bit here, but do you remember, I always think of bad forum prompts as being like the coffee talk lady from Saturday Night Live, you know, read pages 117 to 43 and talk amongst yourselves. You haven't given them enough direction there for it to be a good discussion. You can't expect for them to be able to do that on their own. You need to really guide them to understand what it means to analyze or interpret or whatever you're asking them to do with whatever text you're sort of putting out there. So I'm going to talk now about an assignment that was really successful for me, and that's not to say this is the only assignment out there. But if you haven't used forums before and you're not sure how you would use them in your course, and I know this won't work for all courses. I know, like, you know, this probably doesn't work for accounting. Sorry, Lori. And some of the business courses. But if you have a course in which they're reading a text, which I think in most cases that's true, that lends itself to some sort of analysis, or they're watching a video or something like this, this is an assignment that works really well. And that is, instead of you giving them a question or an assignment prompt, you ask them to come up with 2 critical thinking questions, to read the text, and as they're reading it, they need to come up with questions, and you have to give them a lot of guidance. So this is how I start, by just defining what I mean by a critical thinking question, that it's not just simply factual, that it calls for analysis, comparison, interpretation, rather than just recall. So the way this works in the group is, if I'm in a group of 5, everybody's going to post 2 questions. That means that I've got 8 other questions to choose from, and I need to answer 2 other questions. They don't have to be 2 questions from the same person. I can pick, you know, one from Harry and one from Sam. But that's kind of how the assignment goes. Now, let me just show you a little bit more. I'm going to get out of this. Does anybody have any questions at this point? You can unmute yourself while I'm moving around here.
Can I'm really interested in this because I really felt like that's one area where I struggled spring term in the class is I would tell them to watch a video, and you remember this, Bonnie. They had to watch a video, and then they had to post their reaction to the video. Well, some groups did a great job, and some groups were horrific. And I kept finding myself coming back to the same 2 comments again. You know, link this to your own experience. In other words, share an experience with us, and also link that video to just one concept from the text. And I felt like, and I am dating myself here, a broken record. I kept saying this over and over and over and over and over again until I felt like I was just talking to the wall.
Yes.
So I'm really intrigued with your session.
Okay, so let's continue. So this would be the description of, let me just, maybe I can enlarge this.
We had another question, maybe.
Oh, yeah, sure.
About the benefit of using groups. You know, you were clear about the reduction in load on an individual student, not having to read all the posts from all the students. Then there's questions about would you recommend 1 response per group so that the instructor also has reduced load, or is it more important to get each student's perspective individually?
Well, I've seen assignments where all of the students post, and then you kind of assign 1 student per forum to sort of report out, and then you sort of grade that student. I haven't done that, but I know people have done that, and I think it's a strategy. I always felt like this was an important assignment, at least the way I constructed it, for me to have interaction with the students and help them develop their critical thinking skills. So I always just had everybody, and I graded everybody. And I think let me explain a little bit of how that works, and maybe that'll become a little clearer. So I give students more information than just that definition. And then I make it in a Moodle page so that it automatically links. So in every critical thinking question forum, they can click on this if they've forgotten what they're supposed to do, and this comes up. So this was that information that I had originally. And then I give them some suggestions for how to construct good critical thinking questions. And here's the deal. We're teachers now, so we are pretty used to creating questions. But if you can think back to when you first started teaching, constructing a good question is difficult. It uses different kind of muscles in your brain than answering a question. And that's one reason I really like this assignment, because I felt what it did is, as the students were reading that text or watching that video, it was forcing them to engage and to think in ways that maybe they had not trained themselves to think about a text. So it teaches them to read better as they're going through they're responsible not just to let that information flow through them, but they have to do something with it. So then I give them some tips about how to create a question. I give them some pitfalls to avoid. So, here's some examples. This one's too factual, but here's an interpretive version of that. Avoid vague questions that could be asked of any reading. I taught literature, so they were reading, short stories, novels, and, to say, what was the theme of this short story? Well, you could ask that of any short story. So it needs to demonstrate that you've interacted with that text. Avoid questions that are simply asking, did you like the reading? That's just a judgment, but make it a thoughtful question. And avoid questions that are hypothetical. I'd have them read the story A and P by Updike, and at the end, I always had students that would ask, well, what if Sammy hadn't left the store? What if he'd stayed there? And it was like, well, let's talk about the story as it's written, and what happened in the story. So, I find that most of the time, when I have to give feedback to students, they probably made one of these missteps. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to streamline your grading. And then just reminding them that their goal is to demonstrate that they're interacting with these texts. So when they're making their two questions shouldn't be really, really close together. It should demonstrate, a sort of breadth of my reading of that text. And then suggestions for how to reply to a question. And just, reminders about netiquette and those sorts of things, to be mindful. So what I found when I did this assignment is, first of all, it made them better readers of the text. Secondly, they were owning the forum. It was their questions, and they were answering their peers' questions. So it really solved that problem of, busy work. This isn't busy work anymore. This is me interacting with my students and making that interaction sort of meaningful for them. And then as far as the grading question, what I found is I didn't focus a lot on their answers. Now let's think about it. And I'm going to give myself a break here just so I wasn't being lazy. I taught 5 sections each semester with caps of 25. I had a lot of students, and I had to figure out ways to make this grading streamlined, because that's a lot of forum posts to read each week. Let me just tell you, it's a lot of forum posts. So what I would do when I was grading, I would focus in on their questions. I would certainly look at their answers, but most students are pretty good at answering questions. What I would look for in the answer is to make sure that they support it, with, that they are respectful, of course, of their colleague, but also that they support their answer with something from the text. Those were the things I was kind of looking for. What I was delving into the questions was to make sure they were good questions. And if they weren't, to give them feedback that would help them make better questions in the future. So let's look at an example here. sorry. I actually went into a different. So here's my critical thinking form, and here's Chastity Chicken, and she has, here's her 2 questions. What is the connection between active learning and experiential learning? Well, let's do something fun. You guys in your participants box, let's see if you're still awake here, if I put you to sleep yet. What I'd like you to do is give me a yes or no as to whether, and if you go into your participants box and look at the very bottom, there's a yes and a no circle. Give me a yes if you think Chastity's first question is a good one, and give me a no if you don't think it's a bad one. Ooh, Jennifer thinks it's a bad one. Okay, anybody who said no, you willing to unmute yourself and tell me why?
I can, except my phone's ringing. I think it's no, because there's kind of, it's more factual in nature. Somewhere you probably talked about there is a connection between them, and so you just sort of state what that connection is. But I don't know what the lecture was, so I don't know if that was more inferred, and so it would be better, or whether that is more factual in nature. So.
Okay, yeah, you're right. We don't have a text.
Yeah.
Those of you, somebody who said yes, would you be willing to respond and say why you would think that might be yes? A good one.
This is Doug. I think if they had gotten information about active learning and they had gotten information about experimental learning, then I'm asking them, or this person is asking them, Chastity is asking them to make the connection. The only thing I didn't like about the question is the connection. I would have made it plural, but.
Good.
Okay.
So good, depending on the reading, we could determine if this is really asking for analysis or, sort of comparisons, and we could give the feedback on that. How about the second question? Which active learning asynchronous activity is best for assessing reading comprehension? Let me clear this. And let's try that again. Let us know, yes or no, do you think that's a good critical thinking question? Okay, we've got a few people that are playing the game here. Anybody willing to unmute and tell us why they think it is or not, is not? You don't have to answer the question, you just have to say whether it's good or bad.
So this is Tara. For me, I guess, in order for this to really invoke a level of critical thinking, I feel like they need to explain their thought process, right? And so this is just saying, oh, just give me one. And so I could just pick any of them and I don't have to back it up with any sort of facts. So I guess I would say it could become a good critical thinking question if they were asked to explain or provide evidence for why they selected the one they did.
Great. So you see, in the grading process, those are the things that I would focus on with this student. I would explain why they got a lower score and what they needed to do to improve. And the wonderful thing is, probably in this group, at least one of the other students would have done a question that would have been, not the same question, but would have done what they had wanted to do, but better. So I could say, look at, Sarah's question, her second question, and do you see how she did that? And what I loved about this assignment was because they were seeing other student work, you could do these comparisons. They were sharing it publicly, so there was no problem of that. And they could see, here's another student and they're doing this. It's possible for students to do this well, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because a lot of times students just feel like, oh, it's easy for, the instructor to do it, they're the instructor. And so therefore, they have special powers, but you can't expect a student to be able to do this. So I saw so many benefits to this. I was able to really focus in my grading on helping them to think better and to come up with better questions. And I would be very rigorous at the beginning, and I would, you know, make it really clear, like, you're not there yet. Here's how what you need to do to get there. But I would see by the third or fourth week that this was working. That I did not have to be so rigorous. They were getting it. Every now and then, you know, they'd be a little sloppy and they'd make a misstep, and we'd have to say, well, you know, go back and look at those descriptions again of what critical thinking questions are. You know, you need to avoid, you know, this kind of a vague question. But this was the assignment I mentioned yesterday at Jennifer's hour that she did, where students would say on their evaluations, I hated critical thinking forms at the beginning of the semester, but I realized by the end that that was one of the things that helped me to learn the most. So I'm a big fan of this assignment. That's not to say that's the only way you could do forums, but I did want to sort of showcase this one. I would point to, in the Faculty Moodle resource site, in the forums section, there is a question about, oops, let me get down here. There's a page on what can I do to make my forum engagements, my discussions more engaging. Talks a little bit about your prompt, but it also has a sampler of forum assignments. I put the critical thinking question forum one first, and here's all, you know, my instructions for the students, the handout sort of that I put in a Moodle page. And then I have all these other forums too, the Save the Last Word for Me forum, Reflection on Learning, and there's 2 different examples of that, a case study forum, a group problem solving forum. So this Google Doc, which I'll share the link right now. All right, I think I'll be able to get to the chat. Is anybody else? We have some time, I think. Oh, yes, good. That's all I had today. So we can open it up now for discussion. Anne, did you want to say something? You can unmute yourself.
Just a question. So to be clear, so you use the critical thinking forum instead of discussion forums, or you do both?
My critical thinking forum was my discussion forum.
Okay, that's what I thought. And do you think that there were ever students, or I'm sure that there were, I guess, how did you deal with students that you might have suspected hadn't actually done the reading and were developing good questions because they were looking at the guidelines for critical thinking questions without actually having done more than looking at the subheadings or chapter headings or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to avoid the fact that a student might, you know, pinch a question from elsewhere. I kind of consoled myself if at least they were a good question, that they were recognizing what a good question was. You know, what would happen then if there was a suspicion of that, if the student normally then in their 2 replies, if they hadn't done the reading, would often struggle with being able to give a good answer. And so therefore, you know, that would be something that you could point out to them.
I use a version of this question with almost all of my reading assignments in literature classes, and I don't put it in a forum. I don't really like the forum. I just create an assignment and have the individual students send me their question. But it really works great. I make the deadline before class, so they actually have to do it. And part of it is to motivate them to do the reading, or to do some of the reading anyway. And one of my guidelines is that they actually have to quote part of the reading that their question refers to, and that's part of the grade. But it's pretty low stakes, and it does get them to at least engage with part of the reading. And it gives you something to immediately talk about to get the discussion going. I tell them, bring your question to class, or at least bring it in your head. And you can often sort of start the discussion by saying, okay, what were your questions today? And they have these questions in front of them that hopefully they've done. And I find that the students do them if you grade them. You do have, that's the key. You got to hold their feet to the fire. If they start realizing there are no stakes here at all, and the instructor's not reading or ever grading them, they're not going to do them. But if you grade them, even on a low stakes scale, they will do them, and they are very effective.
If you grade it, they will come.
Yeah, exactly.
I had two questions there. One, Lori asked about whether you could use this material. Absolutely, that's why it's in the faculty Moodle resource. I don't even know, there's probably lots of stuff in that assignment that I've stolen over the years. So feel free to do that. There's no copyright on it. But it is, I will say, it is an assignment I use very successfully with my students for many, many years. So I'm a real believer in the viability of this for making an online discussion work well, making students really talk to each other. There was another question about, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I shared a couple of resources in the chat as well. I've done a lot of work using discussions as well with Bonnie. You'll see that one of the resources I shared is from Stephen Brookfield, and he has this whole workshop that he's published online. It's like a 70-page document as discussion as a way of teaching, but there's some really interesting things in there. A lot of it is based on classroom discussions, but much of that can be translated into the online world. One of the other documents that I shared is called Effective Discussion Participation Guide. And that's actually something that I share with my students, and it's modified from some of Brookfield's work. The thing that's really nice about that is that it helps students figure out how to respond to a question or to somebody else's post. There are some real practical things in there from, share a resource, giving people ideas of what to say, because sometimes that becomes a real challenge for students. Honestly, I've actually found that discussion participation guide useful myself when I am trying to respond to students. So I use some of the tips in there as well. And I do share it with my students every semester. It's part of what I do at the beginning of the term, and it works really well. I think the students have really appreciated having some extra guidance there. And then if I can just share my screen real quick, I want to show you a document that I use. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Things have kind of shifted around a little bit. But this gear chart is something that I have found really useful, and I used it quite a bit when I was at Normandale, but it talks about sort of the stages of setting up a good discussion. So setting that stage for success, creating the good question, and then being a really effective facilitator. I know a lot of us will create these discussions and we feel like it's not really a discussion. The student posts, and then there are 2 replies, and then that's kind of it. And so some of that is in the facilitation part, it's in the discussion part, and how you create the question. And I've had some pretty good success using some of these tips to get students to do more than just the minimum, right? Where you actually get a forum where people are really having a great conversation about something somebody said or a resource they shared. So please use these resources as well. We'll make sure that they're linked with this presentation as well. So.
Thanks, Jetty.
Yeah.
Any other comments? One thing I forgot to mention is getting back to the actual grading thing. I'm going to share it for just a minute. We have a template option when you're making a forum for the grading guides or for the rubrics. So there's a step. Sorry, let's go back to my student course. There's a step in the process where you say, I want to make a forum. I want to use a grading guide or a rubric. And you can either create from scratch, or you can get one from the repository. So I come down here and say, I want To have points, I want to use a rubric, and I save and display, and now I can either define it from scratch or I can create a grading form from a template. We right now have just a few forum rubrics in the repository, but you could start with one of these, and we also have them in the grading guide area, and then edit it if you wanted to. So it gives you a starting point. These are some rubrics that people have used, instructors have used here at Augsburg. So just wanted to mention that. Antonio, if you're talking, you're muted.
My question was, like, in the spring I had an independent study, so there were sessions just with one student, so really no discussion. But Jenny's slide was very helpful, you know, like to have very thoughtful questions, to have a one-on-one discussion. But if you have any other suggestions for these sessions, of course I use videos and I use many things to make the sessions more interesting. But if you have any other suggestions, they're welcome.
Well, I've used what Michael Kidd was talking about too, where, you know, pick a part of the text and really explain why that was significant to you, you know, sort of, you know, help them zero in on something that they're bringing to the discussion.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Well, we could end early. There's nothing that says we need to stay for another 7 minutes unless people have other things they want to talk about. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And as always, the e-learning team is here to help. The LFCs, Jenny, myself. If you have questions, no need to apologize for asking for help. We are here to help you.